I thought, Michael, you would head it up, opening with the PowerPoint.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Jerry, do you want to, shall we wait for Anna?
Okay,
I just gave her the new link. She should be coming on.
Okay. And we
I think
are live.
she should be coming on soon.
Okay. I could bring up the meeting agenda if you'd like to see that. Let me get it. If it'll let me. Things are changing on this platform so much. Anna's joining. And
There she is. Hi, Anna.
here's our agenda for today. And we are live, so we're ready to call to order.
So just to be clear, there's no other, this is court commissioners and staff and legal counsel only.
Yes.
Well, President Everett, Jerry, you're on mute.
John, yeah, maybe I missed it, but John needs to call the meeting to order if he hasn't done so.
Okay. In that case, I'll call us to order for a bridge replacement strategy work session at 1:36 p.m. And overviews and objectives. Okay, I did have a spot here. I'm sorry, Michael. I must have not read this thoroughly. Well, the overviews and objectives are, as we have discussed, trying to come to a shared level of understanding and strategy for the bridge replacement. And I think it's been particularly difficult because it's been going on in two different venues, the port and the bi-state working group. As well as I have come to understand how much institutional knowledge is yesterday's news. And then Michael's opening presentation, I think we'll get a clear view of how much history has gone into decisions that, at least for me as a new commissioner, and I guess I'm not that new now, the things I just didn't know, that they're how I came to be where it is now. And so with that, I turn it over to Michael to start the presentation.
Commissioner Everett, can I speak for a moment?
Sure.
Yeah, the reason I asked to have this work session is that I sat in John's situation. I was chair and I was actually the bi-state representative with Senator King initially. And as I stepped down from presidency and went to commissioner at large, it seemed like I was more and more disconnected of where we were going. So I was really struggling hard to understand. And when you and Christy are in those meetings, it's much easier to put in perspective and understand where we're going than read a report. And so I personally felt like we needed to get back into a round circle so we're all on the same page, because it's so much easier when you're there at the meetings and you're in your chair and you're meeting with Senator King one-on-one, you're talking and you're strategizing, you meet with Kevin one-on-one, and I haven't had that luxury or privy to do that. So that's where I'm coming from. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, that's a great segue. I just reached back or looked back to the last commission meeting where you had some significant public input. And I think part of the takeaway, or one of the takeaways for me, was the fact that although as staff, we feel like there's a lot of progress, we're working on a lot of fronts, I don't think we've adequately summarized that in the form of an articulate strategy that the commission can look at, consider, and either say, yes, that's right, or say, we want to make a course correction. So this was a great opportunity for us as staff to kind of come together and say, how do we describe the work that's going on in a way that is coherent and defensible and articulate. So this is that opportunity. So let's get started. I'll be talking a lot for much of this. The intent is that there's a lot of slides here, but my firm commitment is to move very quickly through them and to maybe have 3 specific landing points for discussion, and we're looking for the commission to consider what they heard, what they know, and reflect back whether they agree with what they're seeing and hearing, or whether they want to talk more about and consider changes to it.
Can you guys see the full screen view?
No, it's
Now,
Okay, let me try and get the full screen view here. How about that one?
there you go.
Okay,
so here we are. It's February 25th. That's a new view of the bridge I haven't seen before. Genevieve is going to be driving this, so there'll be a little pause as we go from slide to slide. Next. So agenda today, this is broken into 3 parts. To look ahead, we really have to look back. So the first part's about the existing bridge, and then we'll have a landing point for as much discussion, questions, feedback as we, if the commission wants. The meat of this is the second part, or bridge replacement strategies. And then the third part is about discussion related and key questions that have come up recently and in the past, how we communicate going forward, and next steps. Next. So here's the duality that the commission has lived in for years, and it's becoming more acute. And again, anything I say is subject to commission questioning or modification. But the port for a long time has asserted that its first obligation is to keep the current bridge safe in operation. Why is that? One reason is because if you make a decision not to keep up maintenance and keep up capital upgrades, as we'll see a little bit later, the deterioration rate of the bridge can accelerate quickly. And because we don't, second reason is because we've never known when or even if there will be traction and success reached in bridge replacement. But this is the bridge we have, this is the bridge we have to maintain. And if we don't, it really becomes realities. We have to keep it safe. We have to replace it at the same time. And that leads directly to strategic decisions, and it leads directly to operational decisions, how or where and on what you invest money. So we got to look back. Let's look at the existing bridge. And I'm going to show you the number of slides here. I'm not going to dwell on it, but I really think it's important to see the work that was done prior, because it tells you where we are today. So questions, as long as I've been here, there's been questions that you've heard even recently. How long is the bridge going to last? When's the bridge going to close? When will the bridge fall down? A fundamental, understandable question from people that want to know this aging bridge, how long is it going to last? So the commission made a decision in 2010 to really try to drive to a better understanding of how to answer that question. And this was at that time called the long-term preservation model. The intent was to really understand the bridge and have a better idea how long it will last. We retained what is now a HBR to do the work. It becomes a complex exercise, and it took a long time, and there was a fair bit of funding involved, because you have to figure out a way to reconstruct the bridge, analyze its component pieces, look back in terms of its prior record, or each component piece prior record in terms of maintenance and condition assessment. Then you need to look forward and try to, based on educated assumptions, understand how long those component pieces will last. And importantly, you have to get a handle on how much it'll cost. So to do that, you've got to break the bridge down into its component pieces. From the bridge is the division to the individual piece. Is this example, the hierarchy is one member of the bridge, a longitudinal channel. And so when you subdivide the bridge into component pieces, these have changed a bit over the years, but those are the basic component pieces of the bridge that you own and operate. the big stuff like substructure and superstructure, and the smaller things like the lift span E&M. To assess each component piece, there has to be some yardstick or methodology. And what we use and what many DOTs around the country use is the National Bridge Institute rating. It's pretty simple. It's 9 is brand new and 0 is you can't use it, or it's failed. Where you want to be is, generally speaking, you want to be a 6 and above. And it's really important here to understand that when you build a new bridge, it's brand new, it's in excellent condition, it's a 9. It can take 20, 30, 40 years before it starts to deteriorate, before it gets down to good condition, say, or satisfactory condition. But once you get to satisfactory or fair, the deterioration accelerates. It goes faster. So throughout this assessment, it was what is the condition assessment of each component piece, and how do we make sure that it doesn't further deteriorate, that it stays at a 6 or above. This is just 2 examples of that more specific subdivision assessment. This is substructure on the left and superstructure on the right. And it's hard to read, but you can see it's essentially a breakdown in what information you have about each piece based on the way it was built and based on the prior inspections, most recent inspections. And that's important because it allows the engineer to assess essentially deterioration rate. So you look back on prior tests or evaluations or inspections, and you try to determine if there was an increasing impact or increasing effect as the years go by. Now we're getting a little bit more specific. This is a quick chart, but it's interesting when you see at the bottom of on the left-hand column, the year, 1924 is the year that some portions of the bridge were built. If you go over to the second column from the right, you can see the substructure NBI rating. So theoretically, it was a 9 in 1924, and you can see over the years how that, in terms of the substructure, that NBI rating has not changed. And then you can see the age on the far right-hand column. The chart on the right just shows what gets to be kind of a complex description of accelerating deterioration, which becomes theoretical into the future, but you can see how it starts to drop off rapidly. So that's the takeaway for how modeling would say, if there's no interventions, it's going to deteriorate more quickly. Now here you see substructure and superstructure again, and I always get a kick out of this because I hope there's no engineers that are listening in, but you can never pin down an engineer with something like this. It's always uncertain, it's always subjective, there's always variables and uncertain conditions. But if you make the assumption that we are not modeling a seismic event, we're not modeling a significant barge strike that takes out a pier or anything like that, Can we go back to the prior one?
Sorry about that, guys. There we go.
So there's 3 different deterioration models based on different presumptive deterioration rates. It's nothing more than fast, medium, and slow. So depending on what assumption you make about how quickly a particular component will deteriorate, you have a bandwidth of high to low. What we did, as you'll see later, we chose the highest deterioration rate to model this, even though this bridge, frankly, is in a great condition. The wind actually helps a lot. It keeps debris off of it. It's generally dry. The lift span doesn't go up very much every year. There's a number of factors why this environment is conducive to, and has shown to be conducive to, slower deterioration. Next. So I'm not going to dwell here much. I'm going to come back to it in a minute, but this is a more recent version, but it resulted in this model. And we called it the 30-year model. This literally looks out 30 years, and it makes the assumption that in 30 years, if the port were owning and managing the bridge, it would still be operational, and it would still be operational past that into the future. Now, that's a really important assumption to consider, because it doesn't mean it's not cheap. It doesn't mean there's a lot of variables. It doesn't mean that things will change along the way, but it means that with the proper resources, recognizing the deficiency of the bridge, its sufficiency rating is under 50, that we could, based on this model and based on these assumptions, keep the bridge safe and operational. Next. This is also was part of the original study, but I just want to show it to you because these are the 3 different deterioration rates. And over time, this is cumulative spending. If you roll up all those assumptions, things that have to be replaced or repaired or maintained, there is increasing costs. And you can see, generally speaking, these ramp up points where, based on the assumptions we're making, that there's going to be an increase in spending. Next. So why are we relatively confident that we're on top of this? It's because it's not a static model, because it changes every year. Every year, and sometimes twice a year, the engineers, John, Mann, other staff, we get together and we talk about that model. Are the assumptions correct? Does anything need to change? And the changes are based on a whole number of different factors. Remember, every 2 years, there's a fracture critical inspection. There are engineers that are on the bridge and within arm's length of every single steel member out there, and usually taking photographs. They're assessing the gusset plates, they're assessing the bolt connections, assessing the joinery, the paint condition, looking for pack rust, all those things. Underwater inspections also every 2 years. Divers go down, they look at the piers, they provide the sketches, and they provide the assessment. Lift span M&E, we're now on a 5-year turnaround for in-depth inspection. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of components. Load rating is variable, but it's about every 15 years. The load rating needs to occur, and we just had one recently. Guardrail gets looked at monthly, sometimes depending on if it's the summer, seems like every week. Steel deck is at least quarterly, and we do generally 2 or 3 times a year, some significant welding done. And I think most importantly, the specialized inspections or testing, those are based on observations of change. Potholing on the north approach ramp, for example, or significant questions about the connection points of the ropes to the counterweight. The underwater inspection was done recently to make sure we really characterized piers 6 and 8 in terms of subsurface or subwater deterioration, et cetera. So all of these collectively are the way in which the model is updated. It's still based on assumptions, but once we have new information from, say, a fracture critical inspection, we have real actionable information that we can make upgrades or make changes. And then just some examples over the last few years of significant investment in lower core painting. Why? Because those are fracture critical members. Lower chords of the truss, the whole length of the bridge are painted, both sides. $3 million project. Span guides, trunnion rehab, big one there. Next. Auxiliary truss repairs, that was on the list for a long time. Frankly, came in a lot less money than we thought, but that provided additional structural connections there at the ox truss and the lift span. Here. Portal truss repair, log truck hit, big improvements to the SKU system. We now have redundant systems, and we have our engineers have the ability to remote in and look on the operation of the SKU system and understand how, or if there's an anomaly or something, and further inspections coming this spring. Just a shout out to John Mann, but it's John and his crew. It's the testing, it's the outside engineers, but it's really our staff that's looking at that bridge daily, especially, well, at least when they drive across it, but frequently they have a lot of experience now in movable lift spans, and they understand that bridge well. And I can't thank John and his crew enough for what they do. Often in the middle of the night, too.
Thank you, Michael.
So just a quick pause, but the load rating that we now know will be in place March 3rd. That came from ODOT. It's a requirement. The question is, can we bring the bridge back up to 80,000 pounds? And I just highlighted what approximately, I believe, the fall will be a decision point for the commission to make. We don't know if it's possible to essentially structurally upgrade the bridge to bring it back to 80K. I think it is, our engineers think it is. It'll really come down to a question of cost. If that's a $2 million project, it's a big difference compared to a $500,000 project. So we simply won't know if it's possible and how much it'll cost, and therefore we don't know and won't know until the commission can see that and make a decision. But that has a specific, direct, and immediate input into the capital maintenance plan. Next. So let's just take a minute and look a little more closely at this. You've seen it before. I just want to make sure that it's clear. This is the capital maintenance plan. It's still not done, but it's been updated over the last few weeks. We've met with, you should have a hard copy in front of you. Involved in this update and this reassessment of where we are and what we need to do includes Kaufman Engineers, Harvey Kaufman, Mark Libby, HDR Engineers, John Mann, myself. Fred Cowell gets involved in terms of looking at how much it'll cost and when. If you look at the sheet in front of you, and hopefully you have one, on the far left-hand side, you'll see those bridge component groups. There's a couple more been added, but this effectively is the same breakdown of the bridge that occurred in 2011. The way in which the bridge is deconstructed to look at similar component pieces that have similar deterioration rates, methodologies, and approach to analyze them consistently. And then you see the next large column. These are the projects that have identified. The top part, the reddish colored lines, those are all capital projects or capital maintenance projects. The blue down below is inspection and maintenance, often routine, sometimes unique, but that's the game plan for the maintenance and inspection side. Capital's up top. Then you look at what the expected duration, the third column, that's how long we think this will take to do. Some of these projects have an engineering component and they have a construction component. And so sometimes you'll see two bars which reflect the engineering side, then it shifts into the project, the procurement side, in other words, bidding, contractor identification, and then construction. The third column is that's what the approximate cost we're projecting to do that. Oftentimes it's based on an assumption, educated assumptions, but nevertheless, we just don't know for sure, but we're trying to get a relatively good handle on how much it'll cost. And then the columns, as you move to the right, if you look closely, you can see there's a defined fiscal year, which tells us when the money needs to be budgeted for. And then there's a calendar year, which tells us when that project might be done. If we're doing an inspection, or if we're doing something that's out on the bridge with construction related, clearly we don't want to do it in January. So we're constantly trying to juggle when we do the engineering, when we do the construction, fit it into a fiscal year for budgeting, fit it into a calendar year in terms of scheduling the work. You can see that the columns are wider in the short-term section. We know a lot more about those. There's a lot more certainty, not total certainty, a lot more certainty about when those projects need to be done. And then you get out to the narrower columns. Those are the out years, which are based again on educated assumptions about periodicity of when, how many times, or the frequency of different work that can be done. And when you get out to the 30-year into things, it's just guesswork. So this is the world we're living in all the time, moving forward a year, looking back on inspections, evaluations, with our engineers assessing what needs to be done in the near term, budgeting for it, making sure the work gets done, and then modifying it constantly. that's the basic layout. Down below, you see inspection and maintenance, and these are often known. We know that every 2 years we're doing a fracture critical. We know same thing with underwater. Specialized inspections are scheduled. I'll just give you an example. At the end of this current fiscal year, we have some very significant testing, including non-destructive testing of the trunnions, rack pinion shaft, inspection of the primary reducers. These are all related to mechanical systems on the lift span. And I would point out under the very bottom, you can see the work importance key, which based on the color, the relative density of the color will tell us whether that's a high priority item or it's a lower priority item. So when it's dark, it's high priority. When it's light, we think it's needed. Not, it could shift a year or so. The darker ones are the most critical. Just briefly, other examples under superstructure, first line miscellaneous steel repairs. That drives right from the fracture critical inspection. We got a really good rating on fracture critical, but there's still some things to do. We're scheduling that, and we're scheduling it in 2 tranches to say the first, which has got a little E in it, you can hardly see that. That's the engineering phase. And then the construction phase would take place next fiscal year in the fall, which is typically the better weather time to do it. And then at the bottom, you see the cumulative spending, meaning how much money in aggregate all these different projects or activities will cost per fiscal year. And again, the farther right you go, the far less certain it is. But we are planning in that way. We're looking ahead 30 years. Next year, we'll look ahead another 30 years and roll it forward. I believe that's a pause point on the. Did I have another slide for this section, Genevieve? Or is that...
Let's see. Go back to that. Nope, that's the pause point.
Go back one again to the CMP.
Okay.
I just want to point out one other thing. On purpose, the commission has said, look, here's where we live in the world. The commission has said, look, we don't want to spend a lot of money on this bridge if the bridge is going to be replaced, right? So this is that sort of excruciating question as we look ahead. If you believe you got to keep it safe and operational, we just don't know when a bridge replacement will come, but we have to be conservative so that we're not spending money that's on things that essentially will be demolished. The next 5 years become really important. The new one that came up, the most important new one that came up, and John, check me on this, is the PROJE, because we now know, or our engineers believe that we're at a sort of a decision point. If we can put a waterproof membrane layer down and then put asphalt on top of it, that'll provide a 20-year fix. That's what our engineers believe. But if we don't do that, then we're going to start losing that approach ramp, especially the north approach ramp, to additional deterioration, rusting of the reinforcement, and that will could lead to a full replacement, which is much more expensive. So the commission, and you'll see it this next budget year, every year now going forward for a while, we're going to have to make a decision how much that we feel we need to do to make sure we're not getting behind the deterioration curve, but not spending too much money that will be unneeded if bridge replacement efforts are successful. All right, I'm going to just stop there. So, questions? Is that clear? Or are we missing something? Do you see a different approach here on the current bridge that we should consider?
Yeah, to me, Michael, that is just a robust presentation of how responsible the port has been towards that bridge, going back to time before I was, even interested, much less having anything to do with it. And I mean, I'm glad that we all heard it. I just wonder when someone comes in with a strong opinion, how do they know that level of attention has been paid and that level of responsibility assumed. And basically, you just described that we're doing a hell of a job taking care of an aging bridge. And so, thanks, I like that.
Yeah, I feel very proud of the way we've tackled this and the way we're methodically and responsibly looking at it. I don't know how to best to communicate that if people question it, other than to have a version of this, I guess, available to either talk to them in person, send to them, or have it on our website.
Hey, Mike, is Kevin on board today?
Yeah, of course, he's there.
Okay. Hey, I just have a question. I'm trying to wrap my hands around this. As a port commissioner, this capital investment we make, I'm gonna be really candid here. Do we plan on, say we do a $10 million bond for some reason, and the new bridge comes in, and there's a balance on that bond of $8 million. Do we roll that debt into the new construction? And also, is there a cash value to the existing bridge being torn down at the time of new construction? And also, Kevin, this is a question for you, Kev. Should we be concerned with P3s that at some point we put too much capital into the existing bridge to maintain a certain weight limit, that the P3 investors have one choice but to raise the rate astronomically to offset the debt for the ROI? Is that a problem we should be? I'm struggling with that, because what I'm trying to say, guys, is that it's much easier to develop a piece of bare land than go in and demolish something, because that's going to be a cost to you. That's a hard number. That's cost of doing the project that makes it hard to pencil. And this is not a bare piece of land we're going. We got an asset here and we're putting money into it. And as a port commissioner, I'm making decisions based on capital investment, reinvestment. And it's really hard for me to feel confident that we're making good investments if we're not going to get our money back out of it. Does that make sense?
Kevin, maybe I could take a first shot at that if you don't mind.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So Fred, you checked me on this, but we had 15-year debt on the bridge that funded the deck replacement and fortunately was able to fund the toll booth upgrades. That 15-year debt defeased, or we rolled out of that. We finished that bond off a year or so ago. So there's no existing debt on the bridge now. So we're debt free. But if there's another project that the commission feels needs to be done to just keep the bridge open and operational, that debt would become part of the financing stack for a new bridge. In other words, that debt would have to be paid off as part of the financial structure for a replacement bridge. That's imperative. But you're highlighting a really important question about how much to put into the bridge now, because if it takes off and gets going, then we will need to be we would need to recoup those funds. The bond need to be paid off out of the new bridge financing.
My question to you is that if you're an investor in a P3 investment into a new bridge, at some point they're going to have to look at the revenue associated with the capital investment. And if we got too big a debt on an existing bridge, are most of the P3s, Kevin, are they existing replacement bridges invested? Are they new construction?
Well, one thing I'm learning is that every P3 is unique into its own situation. So there really aren't very comparable bridges from a P3 nature, and frankly, from any type of construction process. This is a very unique situation, being an interstate bridge, a national scenic area with a toll. So I think that as we start getting into the negotiations, and we're still, in my estimation, still a ways away from being at that point, the full, all of the debt or bonds on the current bridge would just need to be part of the negotiation of any kind of P3 contract.
Thank you.
The other thing, Hobie, Fred, there used to be used to be a debt structure where you would you come in with what's called a shelf registration. You'd go out and say, I'm going to do 100 million or whatever the shelf is. It's sort of like a line of credit. And then you go in every so often, you pull down that shelf, that total amount. We're getting into a situation when you look at this forecast that kind of financing might be more appropriate, because getting to your point, you don't want to hold as much outstanding debt. You don't want to throw a, $15-20 million out there for 20 years. And if you're trying to, at some point you're going to go down this Y in the road. So that's something we may want to look at. We're approaching that kind of transaction. And it's something to look into at this point, probably.
Mike, being on the board for a while, we went through this period where we used the rule of thumb that we were going to replace the bridge in 10 years. Do you remember that format? And as a commissioner, you're thinking all along, okay, that our decision-making should be made that the new bridge will be there in 10 years. And we've kind of got away from that. Is that something we should migrate back to, or is it unrealistic? Because from the board position, it's extremely difficult to make decisions not knowing the window of reality. I know nobody has that crystal ball, but from my position as a board, making decisions is extremely difficult.
Well, yeah, that's kind of excruciating. Rough cut, I've been thinking that 2025 is that sort of departure point, because we don't think there's a need to incur a lot of debt on the current bridge. We can handle a certain level of projects that we foresee. We don't need debt for that. It's possible that depending on the cost to get it back up to 80,000 pounds, it's possible it reaches that threshold that requires some sort of bond issuance. But I don't see that question coming in a big way until about 2025. Why is that? Because that's an odd year. It's because if there's a potential, another transportation out of the Oregon legislature, Washington legislature, it would need to incur by that time. There's infrastructure possibilities or spending opportunities for the new administration, maybe. But when you reach a point a few years from now like that, you lose your FEIS, your record decision goes out of date. So our window, to me, rough cut, is from now until 2025. And then what we've all said is, if there's no progress on replacement by that time, the commission at that time will have to make some pretty serious decisions about significant spending. And I mean, tens of millions of dollars to keep the bridge going. And you'd only do that if there was no hope, or at least no hope for quite a while, the new bridge.
I have a question about the forecast of everything in your maintenance plan or in the engineering plan. Did they have an estimation of when they thought a load reduction was going to happen if we did nothing? Was that discussed before? I mean, did you guys kind of have that in your plan?
No, because remember, that came from other factors. That came from Minneapolis bridge collapse and a relook at gusset plates and a relook at specialized hauling vehicles. So no, that's one thing that could not have been forecast.
I was just wondering if you guys were thinking about a load reduction at some point in the life of the bridge. And then of course this outside audit happened, and if you felt that it was going to be this soon. No,
there's no way of forecasting that. And the last load rating was done in 2003. HNTB did that. That's what defined the 80,000 pound limit. They did the same analysis, or at least a similar one. And the conclusion was it stopped for 80,000 pounds. So And frankly, the load rating is something that there's no consistent interval for that. So you couldn't predict when the next load rating would come.
Michael, is it reasonable to assume some of the elements that capital improvement elements that might be done in the future, if we decide to go forward, to be done now in order to get the capacity of the bridge back up to 80,000 pounds? Are we looking at or is there a potential that the analysis will show that all the work that has to be done is not anticipated at all in the capital improvement plan?
I'm not sure if I totally understand your question. We are anticipating the possibility, maybe the likelihood, that the price point for re-strengthening or upgrading the bridge is feasible, financially feasible, possible to do, and that we'll plan that, at least as a placeholder, to occur in the next 2 years.
Right, but my point being that those elements, whatever they might be, are probably in this capital improvement plan. We're just going to have to do them sooner than we had anticipated. Is that if we go forward with the upgrade?
I don't know that answer, Commissioner. Until we get the engineering analysis, we won't know if, for example, if the north approach ramp is one of those points they identified, the engineering solution may be to collar those columns with steel plate, and that's the solution. We won't know that until then. So it could be a unique solution that wasn't planned in any of.
Okay. So we don't know enough at this point to be able to answer that, really. We have to see the engineering analysis.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, shall we move on?
Yeah, let me restart.
All right, and we get to the more fun stuff. So
Is that the correct screen? Sorry.
That's the correct screen.
Okay.
All right, so now we get into the strategy for the replacement grid. So think back, we talked about the existing grids and the need to keep it safe and operational. Now it's that second reality of do everything possible to replace it. I'm just you can read these. There's a lot of challenges with a big project here. We are not a metropolitan area. We don't have a lot of truck traffic. Our traffic volumes are low compared to most metropolitan areas in the country. There's this lingering lack of trust. We don't know the ownership's going to be. It's 2 states, so there's different jurisdictions. There's different statutory authorities, and we've experienced solid support, but at least in prior years, limited support from our departments of transportation. But there's some good opportunities. A lot of support that's growing. We have the statutory authorities for tolling in P3. We're really looking favorably on the seniority of our congressional delegations. At the senatorial level, it's remarkable what the seniority and the influence that the senators in Washington and Oregon can have based on their placement on various committees. There's an interesting new last administration emphasis on rural projects. So there's a way to stand out now that wasn't there before. So there's a lot of opportunities and pluses on our side. So based on a lot of factors, including what I just mentioned there, here's the 9-point replacement strategy. I'm going to say the last 2 are more approaches, but these are strategic objectives that are key and fundamental to how we're approaching this project and have been for several years now. I'm going to go through these one by one, and then we'll go back and at the end and look at them again. So, bi-state collaboration. This is really, really crucial. It's fundamental. Unless we're engaged and collaborating on both sides, this project won't happen. That's pretty self-evident, and I think it's obvious. So we need that alignment of interest and engaged leadership on both sides. So under each of these actions, we're going to look back just briefly and then look ahead. So we've had really good success lately. I'm going to applaud Kevin for his applaud Mayor Barnes and Mayor Kiefler and Commissioner Souter for taking a really important step, reaching across the river and saying, let's work together. Really a fundamental sort of break point in the efforts that occurred a couple of years ago. So we have an MOU now, we have the bi-state authority, an agreement on the bi-state authority legislation, the P3 work that's going on and delivery models, understanding in the build grant. So all of these are, well, especially the build grant in partnership with Clickitat County. So really can look favorably and positively on the work that's happened. And then looking ahead, we got to maintain and increase that collaboration, finish the bi-state feasibility study. This understanding of alternative delivery models and ownership models, that really needs to stay on that, and we'll see why later. And importantly, this bi-state group can be really leverage advocacy in both state capitals. Second major objective, community awareness and support. Obviously, clearly very crucial as well. So I think we have a really good increasing understanding of the need and the efforts going forward. We have to continue and improve those, and we have to continue to build more relationships with the business community and the potential impact of the existing bridge on their businesses. So the SDIS public outreach was very, very well received and positive. We did our own survey on our strategic business plan, the community forums and open houses that Kevin's had. Kevin's done a really tremendous job in tribal outreach. There's a lot of small things we're doing with ads and news releases, news articles, social media that Genevieve's been handling. Witness the recent article in Business Oregon magazine about the collaborative effort. So these are things we've done that I think have been very positive and will continue. We go into the next phase. We have funding for the next phase. There's going to be a whole other public information and public involvement strategy. And we need to consider looking at project advisory committees, especially public involvement, strategic. Number three, legislative agency awareness. Now, we've been working on this for a long time. The commission, I wish I had a number in my pocket, but I guess it's on the order of $600,000 or $700,000 at least over the last 15 years, federal advocacy alone. And that's the effort with Summit Strategies and before that, Baltimore. So all the efforts that commissioners have made and staff have made to engage with public officials, federal, state, and agency officials it's just fundamental. It needs to continue because those are the decision makers for what will be needed in the future. So you can read a lot of actions. I'd encourage you to look at this latest video that's going to replace the in-person gorgeous nights in Salem and Olympia that Genevieve's put together. It's a tremendous bit of work. We really have strong relationships with our elected officials. And we have a new and I think very positive ongoing relationship with ODOT, WSDOT, and FHWA. And that's been important to increase that level of trust with agencies and understanding of where we're going. I want to point out this National Scenic Area. I don't think people really fix on that, but that was a pretty big win. We have specific carve out in an application for in the FAST Act for infra legislation that recognizes projects in national scenic areas. That was the result of efforts that we made with Summit Strategies, Paul Heemstra, and the support of our legislators. We got $5 million from the state for FEIS, $5 million build grant. I think we feel really positive about the outcomes of our longstanding efforts on the legislative side. We are working on the study authorization in both states this current session. Kevin's been engaged with numerous meetings directly with officials that will make decisions about whether they will allocate additional funding for us in both states. This current session is going on. 5 million we're asking in Oregon and 5 in Washington. We're going to continue monitoring federal transportation grants because we believe there's going to be an infrastructure bill coming. And if we can continue and maybe succeed in efforts to increase the TIFIA allocation, that will help whether it's whoever is doing the project, but to increase that loan amount will be a very big benefit. So fourth, this is an important one. It's fundamental to our strategy. We have to demonstrate project readiness. We have to demonstrate project credibility, because unless we do, we're not on anybody's map for funding. The 5 million by the state in 2017 was absolutely crucial, because that meant the state was saying, we recognize their project, we recognize the need, and we're willing to convey $5 million to you to get this going. Once you're in, once you have that degree of support, you can build on that support. What we have to do is complete the FEIS, get the record decision, and reflect that back to those legislators that supported us, and we're willing to allocate funding to do so. But it also means credibility in terms of federal agencies and state agencies that this is a worthy project. It has momentum, they're making progress, and therefore it needs to be considered from the standpoint of funding, entitlements, or statutory changes. So we've seen these before. Some of these are somewhat repetitive, but there's the transportation allocation in 17. There's the build grant. Now the state of Oregon, the federal government are saying, we recognize the project and we're willing to support it. That's huge. And I'll come back to it, but we have a really solid team, and that credibility itself. We have people that have longstanding relationships, committee staff with legislators at the federal level and at the state level. And we need to show that bi-state collaboration, and we need to show that the community supports them. So it connected right back to the first strategic objective of bi-state collaboration. We've got to finish the FEIS. We got to show those legislators that we took the money, we used it wisely, and we got the job done. Once we do that, that allows us to build on it and allows us to demonstrate credibility and move forward. We got to characterize the geotechnical conditions. That'll help on the technical side in a huge way. You need to hire the project engineer, go through the right process, have that credible, large-scale engineering firm behind us. That brings additional project readiness and credibility. We need to get legislative support for the bi-state authority. And we need to make sure that we know the statute in Washington, and we know what we need to change to allow a new interstate toll bridge to be built in the state of Washington and connected to SR. Those are the next level efforts to demonstrate that credibility. So 5 is, it's also fundamental from a strategic standpoint, because I think you've heard, and you may have heard from people say, well, don't spend that money or don't do that because you're going to lock yourself into a certain project delivery approach, or you're going to preclude another one. And everything we're doing now, we believe, is needed to be done and can be hugely beneficial no matter what ultimate owner of the bridge there is identified or delivery method is utilized. We don't know, and this is a fundamental premise, the approach won't be determined until after these other questions are answered: ownership, funding, project delivery. But everything we're doing now needs to allow for any possibility to occur. So here are the completed actions. We have the legislative authority for P3, that was 17. The Port Commission approved the solicitation policy. So now we know how we would approach it if there was an unsolicited proposal, or the commission or another entity based on the conveyance of the statutory authorities would determine that they wanted to do a P3. That's a commission action that occurred 3 years ago. The public work sessions on P3, the panel discussion, those have occurred in both 17 and most recently. And then in the next phase, the ongoing evaluation, or beginning an ongoing evaluation of alternative procurement methods. Final engineering contract. My apologies, the width is a hanger-on. Owner's rep contract. Again, credibility, readiness. We do need to have that engineering connection liaison to the engineering firm that's hired, representing us, that acts as the interpreter, as the cajoler, as the monitor of those that will begin late this year. Or finish the financing, project delivery alternatives, and continuing those meetings that I've been participating with the DOTS and FHWA. All right, this is one where I want to just say right up front that the commission, in my opinion, has assembled an absolutely stellar team of professionals, of individuals that have vast experience and that are wrapped around this project and around your staff. And I think the commission has done a remarkable job in assembling this group. And I do want to point out that I want to say right now that I am eminently proud of the work that Kevin has done. And I think he has been, and it continues to be, the perfect individual for this phase of the work. I don't know anyone else in the country that's been successful in obtaining 3 different infra or build grants. Remarkable. But we are lucky to have him. I'm fortunate that he said he would come and work for us. And I think he has done an effective and admirable job. So let's look at the team. These are not only regional experts, but national experts in their own way. So you have assembled a team more on the strategic side: Siegel, Green, Clary. There's many more in that category, but from the EIS and the engineering side, WSP has vast resources and vast experience. Those are just 2 of the individuals. There's many more that are participating in the EIS. There's your legislative team. Heemstra at the federal level, Bates in Oregon, Boswell. These are people that have long, deep credibility with legislators and significant experience. In terms of public information, we have our own Genevieve Scholl, who is a resident expert, and I won't put her up against anyone. And then most recently and currently, you have Ann Pressington. And then a couple of Kevin and myself. So if you add up the years of experience of all these individuals, it's somewhere in the order of a quarter century. I just want the commission to know that, and how much I believe in this team, or what we need right now and for going forward in the work we're doing. So this is a kind of chart you just should squint at, but this is basically the current organizational chart of the FEIS phase of the project. The commission and licensing that's evolved are really a peer-to-peer relationship. The rest of the blue are either staff or they are key consultants. You can see the line of the lobbyists there. And then you see an orange box of the FEIS steering committee. That's the one that I participate in with Region 1 Manager Ryan Windheimer, Carly Francis, the Southwest Region Manager, and Phil Ditzler, the Oregon Manager for FHWA. And then you see the line, vertical line going down through Kevin to WSP. The line of smaller ovals there are these various subject matter consultant experts, P3 Clarity, Steve Siegel, and others. And then below that, you see the line, the multiple component pieces of the WSP. Next. So we're going to look at it in a second, but the next most important step is to select the project engineer and select the engineering expert that acts as our owner's representative vis-a-vis that contract. And then you look at the next phase, rough cut organizational chart. There's lots of ways to organize this, of course, but you see some, potentially the introduction on the right, and orange boxes, which are the advisory committee. Bi-state working group, maybe becoming a bi-state bridge authority, public advisory committee, so that we can stay in touch with the various component pieces of this, of our community, meaning Washington and Oregon. And then the introduction of a technical advisory committee, which is ODOT, WashDOT, and local facilities directors that can advise the engineering team as they start to look more specifically at connections to SR14 and other engineering components. So pursue all available funding sources. I don't know if there's much to say on this. Probably said it already, but the idea is that we have to look at everything. It's not only to the federal level, it's both states. We have to look at TIFIA, obviously the consideration given to P3 and private funding sources for some of it. We need to see what's possible for the port to contribute. And I think we've been pretty successful looking back. $5 million Oregon, $5 million bill, commitment to a local. Looking ahead, we don't know yet, but we're working hard for another 10 million from the state at the federal level for other opportunities. 8 and 9 are more approaches. You know, they're more, they're fundamental to the strategy. There's not a whole lot we can point to other than everything we've mentioned before. This is really crucial for the commission to think through, say yes, that's right, or no, that's not an assumption. But our assumption is that this project will transition to another agency in the future. The assumption is that the Port of Hood River will not lead this project when you get into the pre-construction phases and the construction phases. We may have a piece of that. We certainly have the statutory report in Oregon that might be conveyed to another entity or utilized in some way. We certainly have tolling expertise. We could, but fundamentally, the assumption is that the project is transition to a bi-state working group, bi-state bridge authority, or potentially a Department of Transportation's authority to take it. And then finally, again, a more of an approach, and I think it should be self-evident in what you've seen before, but we're not working one project strategy, we're working multiple. We're looking at the possibility of a P3, we're looking at the possibility of a bi-state bridge authority. We're looking at staying in touch with the dots, and potentially at some point they may be able to take on either the project or be able to contribute essentially their engineering expertise and project delivery expertise on big projects to deliver the project. All of these are taking place at the same time. So that's the 9 points that should fairly well summarize the strategy we're on. Let's look at that. Well, you should have a hard copy of this phase diagram. I don't think it's necessary to go too much into detail here unless the commission wants to. But here we are at the beginning of 2021, and we're looking to the end of the so-called NEPA phase, or phase 1. At the same time, we've already started phase 2 work. Kevin is working actively to prepare the solicitations both for the bridge engineer and for the owner's representative. We're working actively in the states in terms of legislation. We have to work this year to prepare more specific rough cut financials alternatives analysis. We need to finish the geotechnical analysis. We need to get to that 15% engineering phase. So there's multiple efforts that are taking place in phase 2 before we finish phase 1. And that's the way this project will go. When you get to near the end of phase 2, it's not really indicated on this diagram, but before you get into phase 3, that's really the point of departure for the commission. We need to know, we need to find out if there's authority for a bi-state, authorization for a bi-state bridge authority or not. If there is, then that's essentially creating a new government. So there will be multiple efforts to figure out how to do that. How do you fund it? What's their governance? What's their, there's a multitude of operational questions. But there's a decision point in 2023 or so that says, how will this roll out? Who will effectively take the baton to build the bridge and to make those fundamental decisions about who's the engineer to hire and what's the project delivery method? And in other words, is a P3 going to be considered? Those are decisions that under the current strategic assumption is that many of those decisions will not be made by the Port of Hood River unless the bi-state bridge authority says we need the port to continue because it has statutory authority or because for other reasons. So effectively, when you look into phase 3 and beyond, that's a little bit over the horizon, and it's highly dependent upon how things go in the state legislatures and what the bi-state working group feels is the best approach to take. You could just, I guess the other, you can see down below the line, a lot of what we're doing is tied to the episodic nature of legislative session. So typically you're not going to get a lot done in a short session. It's unheard of to have a major legislative finance, or sorry, transportation financing package in a short session. So you're looking at the odd years and considering, and our lobbyists have done this, what are the odds that there'll be a transportation bill 21, 23, 25? And that's why I said earlier, when you get out to 25, it's a long session. That's if there hasn't been a major transportation funding commitment from the states by 25, the odds are you're not going to, or at least it's a lot less likely that you're going to achieve success. Most any financing package has contributions from both states, a revenue bond based on the tolling revenue, and a significant degree of participation from the federal government, both a TIFIA loan and a flat out grant. So unless, when you get to 25, you don't have success in those areas, then it's a lot less likely. You can deliver in the near term, and decisions need to be made, significant funding on the current grid. Okay, I think that's a pause point. Unless we forgot a slide, Genevieve.
There's,
oh, okay.
I'm not sure which.
Yeah, so this was just a reminder again, bi-state collaboration, community awareness, legislative awareness, project credibility, flexibility, get the team and build on the team, pursue every funding approach available, and anticipate or assume that the bridge project transitions to another entity and work it all together.
And then Michael, did you want me to keep this slide up or just do a roundtable discussion and we can refer to some of these things?
I'll leave that to the commission. These are some of the specific questions that you've heard or received from public input. And I felt at some point the commissioner might want to have specific answers to these questions, or at least consider them and then decide if they of course agree or don't agree.
Actually, Genevieve, I'd like to weigh in a roundtable discussion first, if we could.
Okay.
Yeah, just to add my 2 cents as between being the bi-state work group, I think what Michael said, 21, 23, 25, and our financing needs really are hard points. Because we're not talking about, you know, options anymore. If we don't succeed by 25, we're done with being able to tell ourselves anymore that we're not going to have to invest more money than we want to into our existing bridge. It's also true that for tolls to end up any place or around where they are now, to have the toll structure for our valley remain about where it is now, which we can bear, we're going to have to find grants in the neighborhood of $200 million. And to get to that number at the state and federal level is really a political effort, which is why we have such, you know, stars are aligning in our congressional representation and in the timing of the legislative sessions for both states. But I do believe that we need to understand as a commission that this is politics, and it's politics to be able to fish for money. We have to make ourselves pretty and desirable to the people that are going to make the decisions about passing out an infrastructure program for the United States of America. I think that's it. That's just the strategy that I see is we got to find $200 million, and then we got to match up to our legislative timeline.
Kevin, I have a question in regard to the 30% in phase 2 to 30%. You said 15 to 30% engineering cost. Is that, I'm trying to think, I'm back in Washington, D.C., is that pretty much the standard percentage is 30% before the legislation will look at you, legislators?
Well, I think in Oregon, that 30%, we're actually, what we're looking at is something called a design acceptance packet. And
Okay.
that's an ODOT phrase that really is right at that 30% mark, which is a good step off point for doing a project delivery evaluation. At that DAP or 30%, you really still leave all of your options open for project delivery, which is really critical. But to answer your federal question, as I think that is, you now identified risk. You now have a better cost estimate than you've ever had before. And you've got some professional support behind those quotes. So yeah, our numbers will be taken much more seriously. And so like the infra grant notice that just came out this week, that's kind of what held us from really making much of a dent in that application, is we didn't have any engineering. But I think, you know, this time next year, you know, it's possible that we could be very competitive on the federal infra grant. And that's, you know, those are right around $50 million right there. I mean, it's still highly competitive, but the fact that we got the build grant really leverages our success onto other US DOT grant opportunities.
Kevin, when we authorize an engineering firm to do the 15 to 30%, and the balance of the engineering, will it be the same firm?
Well, it kind of depends on what the project delivery approach turns out to be. You know, they could stick around, they may go away. It just kind of depends if you're doing design build or CMGC or what the project delivery approach is. The critical relationship for the port long-term in the region is that owner's representation contract. Theoretically, that owner's representation contract will be there from now through the end of construction, representing the Mid-Columbia region and the Port Commission on the technical nature of not only the AE design, but the construction elements and other technical needs as they arise.
Thank you. Hey, I got one more question about capital. Is there any value to our bridge? Is there any buyout? For example, if Jerry was to sell his practice, his clientele is a tangible asset. In the private sector, it's called blue sky. It's not that big a factor anymore, but it's still present. Is there a value to our bridge? And if so, how does one drive at that?
Commissioner, or Commissioner Strike, we looked at that several years ago, and it depends on the price of steel. Extracting that steel, some of it's easy, some of it's hard, but this goes back 5 or 6 years, and at that time, the market for steel, the price of steel was such that it was net. There was no value to the bridge, meaning the value of the steel as salvage offset the cost, and it was slightly negative even. So if a new bridge is built, of course, the deconstruction of the existing bridge will be part of that contract. If steel prices change, maybe the answer is different, but I don't think anyone should expect any significant positive funding or out of the demolition of the current bridge.
This is a question for, I don't know if it's for Michael or Kevin. In our P3 presentation that we had with the bi-state group, both companies that gave presentations, when we talked about this goes back to that 15 to 30% engineering design. Could you clarify, because both companies said that, we don't want to go too far down our own road with engineering if we're even going to think about working with a P3, because most of the P3s across the country would want to have their own engineering done. And so I just want to have it be clear for the public, how is what we're trying to achieve with this 15 to 30% design going to balance if we decide that the P3 route is the smarter route for the public?
I guess I would start and answer that by saying I look first, not to the P3 firms right now. I look first to the woman that participated from the state of Washington and the gentleman that participated from the state of Colorado. Remember, the state of Colorado had a really detailed analytical path for determining whether it even made sense for a P3. And I think the woman from the Seattle area was experienced at the federal level and the state level. I'll say cautiously, I guess, that most any P3 firm will say that. And to some extent, it's true. The sooner you bring in a P3 partner, the more influence they can have. But what I don't think those two firms understand is the specific complexity of this project, where, for example, you don't even have statutory authorities in the state of Washington. So there's a significant political path that needs to follow to be able to deliver a new bridge. And what we believe and what our experts are saying is this engineering work would be necessary no matter what. In other words, the definition of this, it's not that complicated. There's a certain opening for the river traffic, a certain width that leads to a certain number of piers in the water. The key question is, what's the underlying geotechnical condition? And no one's going to get a good cost estimate until we know the geomorphology and how deep to bedrock and how much sediment there is. And the number of piers is fixed. And this type of bridge structure is fixed. So there's significant advantages to moving forward on engineering in terms of positioning the project for funding and for political support. And there's at this point, we don't believe there's significant advantage to bringing in a P3 partner at this early phase.
Mike, to elaborate on Christy's concern is the liability aspect. If you bring an engineer in and they make determinations Jerry's question for you too. Does the liability transfer over to the initial engineering firm? Or do we start pointing fingers? I mean, that's my concern. I think Christy was trying to bring that out, that it seems like if you have a contractor come and build your house initially, do the foundation, then that cracks, he points a finger at the framer. I mean, do you see where I'm coming at, where she was coming from, I think? Does that concern you, Kevin, at all, as far as liability of one engineering firm starting it, going 15, 30%, and then starting another one? To me, it's a potential liability unbelievable.
I think I heard about most of that. As far as the P3, Hobie, was that commenting towards the P3, just to clarify?
No, just in general, Kevin, just far as you have a firm come in and they do 30% of the engineering and they don't get awarded the next contract for the balance of the 70%. It appears to me that information they have is not worthy. I wouldn't want to go and use somebody else's information.
Yeah.
The liability is going to be on that initial firm for 30% of it.
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying. It's not particularly different than the geotechnical work as well. So, we're looking to try to get the build pre-award so we can get that geotechnical award work done as quickly as possible. Once that information is made public, everybody can evaluate it, poke holes in it, take and do with it as they see fit. And I think the key point that gets reinforced to me is that when you get to that 15 to 30%, you haven't locked yourself into a whole lot of design. It's really more identifying risk. Where's the risk in the project? There's a lot of preliminary engineering trying to just identify where's your stormwater collection system going to be placed. Which utilities need to be identified, right-of-way acquisition.
Okay.
So you're still early on.
Okay, it's mainly for funding purposes too, to make sure we have our ducks in a row and we're moving forward and we have this. It's not so much that the next engineering firm will use that information for the complete design. They may use portions of it, but they won't rely solely on it, is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that, with the owner's rep, so we'll have an owner's rep that will be representing the port from a technical perspective, and they, maybe challenge isn't the right word, but do kind of a peer review on the assumptions that AE design firm is making as they're developing preliminary engineering and putting their package together up to that 30%. So that once that process ends, all of the information is going to be public information, but we're not going to be getting into a lot of detail as to like the loading on the bridge segments and things of that nature. And it will have been vetted. And frankly, in that one org chart, you notice there was the advisory committee, so that's another place where people in the public in our community can actually, with experience, can give their 2 cents in the process as we're looking at various submittals from the design firm. So I feel really comfortable from what people have been telling me that 30% is still a very safe spot to make a jump off point for project delivery. It doesn't lock any of the future teams into any real specific detail on engineering.
And add, Hobie, we only have about 6 million to spend out of the build grant. And with that 6 million, the geotech is like 750,000. That is universally applicable to characterize the bottom of the riverbed. And then I think we got just about enough money listening to the P3 and Chuck Green to have ourselves be presentable and hopefully made credible at the federal level, and create the kind of information that no matter who our contractor is, will find it useful to take risk out of their bid. And that's about as much money as we got.
Yeah, I think that maybe a bit of my confusion came when, when we were talking in a previous meeting and, with the public comment that we got back, so far, there's a lot of obvious focus on that bike ped lane. And so what I'm hearing is that this 15 to 30% design, we're not even going to be talking about what the actual bridge is going to be looking like. This is just for the groundwork, laying the pieces to then move forward to different stuff. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think really the AE design firm that we're looking to, along with a public outreach consultant like Ann Pressenton at WSP Enviro Issues, there would be a whole process for determining the aesthetics and additional facility amenities, if you will. And that'll be a public process. Maybe there will be a committee, maybe it will be more public and broad than that. But that's where up to that 30% is evaluating and pinning down what the public's expectations are and laying that out so that there's criteria that become part of the next RFP for however project delivery is ultimately delivered.
Yeah, I would just add to that by saying, I do think that to get to 30% engineering, you're making some fundamental assumptions about the bridge structure, about the piers, the footings, and various things that are important to the bridge. And it would need to respond, remember the record of decision, the FEIS process we've gone through has identified very specific things that are mitigation items that need to be carried out. So the 30% would have to be responsive to the mitigation directives in the FEIS. But it would not preclude value engineering steps that a subsequent engineering firm could take if they believe they can make it cheaper. So the one caveat that I have there is that if in this next phase we fundamentally try to address what's the look of the new bridge, is it an iconic bridge with cable stays and features, significant features that are somehow derived from the public standpoint what they believe the look of the bridge should be? If another firm came in and said, we want to value engineer that, we want to change the look, we want to make it much simpler, that could have a significant impact on cost. But at the same time, you believe that this next phase process will ultimately determine what that final look will be with public support, or at least Columbia Gorge Commission support, so that will be in fact the way in which the bridge will need to be designed and look in the future. I'm not sure if I said that well, but there are some that have said we want to make this a really iconic bridge, something really unique about it, and that can translate into expensive. We need to go through that process, and we need to, in this next phase, come to the conclusion about what the basic look of the bridge is, whether it has significant new features and looks iconic or not.
I defer to Commissioners Everett and Chapman, but it seems to me this discussion that we're having today in this presentation, Michael, which I think is excellent, really should also be presented, or at least maybe in a condensed form, to the bi-state working group. We're making some assumptions here, including ultimate ownership of the bridge, and how this process will work forward. I know we've had some questions about whether or not we're on the right path in terms of the steps we're taking. And I feel like it's important that the bi-state working group have that consideration to see if they in fact are on the same page we are. And if there is to be a change or review with regard to the appropriateness of the steps we're taking, that they certainly need to be on board with it as well. It should not be a unilateral thing that's done strictly by the Port of Hood River. So That's my 2 cents worth.
And
Yeah.
and if I could just hop in, it was kind of relatively late, but I did forward the link of the YouTube channel to the members of the bi-state working group. I'm sure they had other things going on, but just alerted to them that it will be archived as well.
Could I pose a question back to the commission? The one element of the strategy that we laid out that has, I guess, the most, I guess, just needs a clear affirmation or not, is whether the assumption we're making that the work we're doing will ultimately lead to a handoff of this project to another agency. Does the commission agree with that? Or does the commission think there's qualifiers there? Or what, is that the right fundamental strategic assumption to make?
If I could, I believe it is. As you know, I prefer the idea of a dot or the dots together being involved as opposed to a consortium of local governments, small local governments of the gorge. At the same time, I think that any opportunity we have to mitigate the cost of this with grants, certainly from the state of Washington, are going to be dependent upon the people in Washington being pleased or satisfied with the way this is going. And what the ultimate ownership will be. I think if this is driven as a Port of Hood River project, I think our funding opportunities are going to be severely limited, and possibly even our permitting and legislative approvals are going to be limited. So, yeah, I think that there will be a handoff. There should be a handoff, and I think the most economically viable bridge we can have is if it is done by some other entity. So.
Yeah, I agree fully. I mean, there have to be caveats. It's with conditions where, I mean, what happens to the existing bridge? What happens to the tolling agreement? There's a lot of details that could be devilish, but I fully agree. This has to be a bi-state effort to be successful in the end.
Does the rest of the commission agree with that?
Yeah, I do. Knowing everything that, knowing what I know right now, absolutely yes. Obviously, we'll learn more as this moves forward, and there will be stipulations or a lot of different conversations, but I think absolutely yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I have to agree with that too as well. Yeah, I think, the port hit a home run when they bought the bridge, but it was an existing bridge and it had a cash flow associated with it. And, but I think for us to take this single-handedly and move forward and be the sole ownership of the bridge is probably not realistic. And I agree with what Dave said earlier about being a bi-state movement forward.
And we need to bear in mind that if we are successful, however it's done, that will be a federalized bridge, and there's going to be limits on what funds can be used for what purposes anyway. So, yeah, the golden days of bridge ownership, I'm afraid, are behind us.
Yeah, that's true, or will be. Two things I just want to point out. The 2017 legislation that clarified the statutory authorities for the Port of Hood River to own and operate a toll bridge allows us to convey those authorities to someone else. So that would allow another agency to essentially receive the same allowances we have. A second aspect of that legislation was that that bridge cannot be sold. And I don't know if commissioners fully realize that. So the bridge can't be sold. That was a specific issue that was raised by a specific legislator that was important to get support from. And that was the concern he had. So the bridge can be conveyed to a private entity through a long-term lease or some other agreement like that, but we cannot convey it in fee to anyone else. So it's just it's a qualifier, I guess, for P3 that a long-term agreement of some sort cannot include a model that's been included somewhere other places where the asset is effectively sold to the private sector.
Just as a comment, Michael, reading through the US Highway 36 P3, the Colorado from the P3 presentation, long-term leaseback was the vehicle they used.
Yeah. Good. All right. Are there any other aspects of the 9-point strategy that the commission wants to question or discuss or comment on? So does the commission feel comfortable with that as the strategy that you might describe to others asking questions or that want clarification about what we're doing?
That's well said. Did you articulate an elevator speech that we could all carry forward?
Actually, this is something Genevieve really wanted to do. So yes, it's part of our slideshow. That's coming up. Okay, so I guess can we feel comfortable then that this fairly describes the strategy that we're engaged with and for the commission? No, yeah. Okay, I guess I'm not hearing any objections to it. Okay, so shall we go to some questions?
Do you want to do those key issue questions, that list of questions, Michael, or do you want to go on to the third item on the agenda, the project communications?
Well, I'll defer to the commission on that.
I'd move on. It was up to me. Yeah.
Let me get to where I need to be here. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so just as a little bit of preamble, I think following those first two items on the agenda, it's really clear that this project could not be more complex. And it is really challenging to think about how we manage the public information and also internal communications, even down to the staff level on this project. One of the metaphors that I really liked that I heard in the past couple of months was from President Everett, who described the project as, you know, the stars need to align, but they're not sequential. And really, this project can be thought of as a constellation. All those important data points, all those important key messages are the stars in a constellation. But of course, some of them are more light years away than some that are right real close. So we really wanted to touch base and review the processes that we're using right now to communicate with the commission and with the bi-state working group, and also review some of the tools and the assets that we've developed so far, and give you sort of a project update on some of the things that have been requested for us to develop and where we're at with those. So first we'll talk about commission. The methods that we're using right now to communicate with the board on the project are generally driven with Kevin's bi-monthly written reports, the bridge replacement project update reports that up until just a few months ago were a standing discussion item on the agenda. We moved those to informational really in an effort to not have a 5-hour meeting every other week for you folks, but we really do need to review that decision and make sure that you're still getting a clear enough picture of the project updates from Kevin with it on that part of the agenda. And of course, Kevin does still do the verbal updates during the meetings, especially on mission critical or specific decision points. And then of course we have news articles, media releases, And we try to give you a heads up whenever something is in the news or in some sort of broad public sphere. And of course, we have one seat on the Bi-State Working Group and one alternate, and that is President Everett and Commissioner Chapman at this time. And so during committee reports on the agenda, that is the time for those representatives to report on the activities of the Bi-State Working Group. Then with the Bi-State Working Group, also regular meetings, verbal reports, not just from staff, but also from the consultants, agency representatives, and folks that Kevin has invited to come and present. We are currently hosting the Bi-State Working Group webpage on our website. I think as we move forward, that would be more of an independent entity. You wouldn't get to it at portahoodriver.com. It'll have its own URL, but right now it resides on our website. And it includes a really robust project archive that has really anything you ever wanted to know about replacing the bridge is hosted on our website right now, as well as meeting notices, minutes, and Kevin has a blog that provides project updates. Some of the tools that we work on, we try to develop some, like I said, it's an extremely complex project, but we try in every one of these tools to somehow simplify it but still give good information. So one of the things that we'll do, sorry, I'm not sure who this person is.
Oh, that's me.
Okay.
I have to get off the video.
Okay. Whenever we have meetings with representatives in the government, we usually leave behind a handout that I call lobbying handouts, and we'll provide that to our lobbyists, and also we'll take that as staff, or you will take that as commission, as electeds to a meeting, and it's a leave behind piece that really is important, and it's something that the legislative staff will use to either write legislation or provide information on a letter of support for a grant, for instance. They really need, it's really help me help you, and we really need to do the work for them, and most often we're writing the text of what we need for them and making sure that it's correct. WSP is producing the posters for the project updates that before COVID, Kevin was posting at the White Salmon Library, the public library, and then also here at the port office in our lobby. Since COVID, we haven't updated that poster, but it is a great way to make sure that folks know what's happening this month. And literally it changes monthly, which is incredible. We've reviewed today the legislative strategy chart, and I want to make sure that you all understand that that's a living document, and things shift and change, and we're trying to be as responsive as we can, but that's the home base for our legislative strategy, and you can request that from myself, Michael, or Kevin at any time, and we'll be happy to share that with you. I'll skip number 4 because it's coming next. But one of the things that I thought was interesting in our last meeting was a request for staff to develop a chart that would speak to tasks that we're planning and whether or not they're useful for any of the available project delivery options. For example, the discussion we just had, why should we do 15 to 30% engineering if we end up going P3 and they don't want that? So how could we distill those major expensive tasks into a chart to share with you and the Bi-State Working Group and the public? Okay, this project will be valuable for design build, design bid build, P3, you know, whatever, all these different methods. And that's going to take us a while. So the update on that project is message received. We know you want it. We'll work on it, but it's going to take us a bit to get to that point. I already mentioned the archive of the resources, and of course we have Facebook and Twitter, and we will share major milestones on those. I think as we move forward, the project itself will have its own social media feeds that really are, in this day and age, the best way to get the most real-time information out. Back to number 4, the elevator speech. Well, I think for us as staff of the Port of Hood River and the board of the Port of Hood River, I think most frequently what we get asked is, what are we doing? You know, what is the port's position? What is the port's strategy? And we need an elevator speech for that. And so I'm proposing this. This isn't a final draft. This is just a proposal to see if you can live with this one. The Port of Hood River strives to be the best project partner by removing barriers to success in all potential pathways forward, maintaining project credibility, visibility, and progress, while planning for a future without bridge revenue, and developing a new business model that will continue to provide economic benefit within the Port District. So that's the proposed speech. You don't have to yay or nay it right now, but that's what we're proposing as staff, is how do you answer the question, well, where's the Port on this? That's where we're at. We're doing everything we can to meet that first obligation and that second obligation at the same time.
You know, Jim, the other question I get overwhelmingly is win.
Win-win. The answer to that one is it depends. And again, we'll work on an elevator speech for that. Michael and Kevin will do a much better job of being able to say, if this, then that, 2025. But my answer really is it depends on a lot of different factors at this point.
I'm kind of saying 6 years, best case.
Yeah. So that's it. I'd like to open it up again for discussion about communications. What do you guys need from us, and how can we get it to you on a regular basis?
I can say as a commissioner, I've been very happy with the communication. I like the updates that Kevin does. I like the fact that he does sort of a concise page or two to, hit the high spots, but then all the other information is there as well. And then the information you're providing, Genevieve, I've been very happy with the communication. It might be, we do it obviously with just, if there's no questions, it goes on with that element of the agenda. It might be down the road every couple of months, to actually have a discussion, not just read it and move on. But the information is good though.
One of the things we talk about a lot as a board when we do spring planning, fall planning, and then of course our strategic business plan and our communications plan is specifically the use of new media. We have not yet produced any informational videos about the bridge replacement project. That might be something we want to do. It's something that you cannot do once, simply because things do change. That the stars in that constellation, they rearrange themselves on our sky map. So, maybe that's something we want to do twice a year, every 6 months. Really give a nice, well-produced video on the project status as it is now, with graphics, interviews, and some video. A lot of the benefit of the new media is it's simply just more engaging than reading a 20-page report. You can get the same amount of information across to a wide audience at really low cost, relatively, with video. And that's something that I can certainly propose in our next budget cycle, if that's one thing we want to work on. And I think we do have some money in our public information line items on the WSP side for something like that as well. I just don't know if that's something you guys want to look at or discuss maybe.
I think it sounds very exciting, Genevieve. In fact, Christy and I think should bring it up at the bi-state work group.
Okay.
One of the questions I have to follow on what Genevieve is saying is there a better way or a different way that we can bring the work of the bi-state working group, the discussion, the major points, the next steps and such back to the full commission so that the full commission is fully aware of what Commissioner Everett, Commissioner Chapman are aware of.
I struggled with it. I haven't done a good job with it because the bi-state work group moves so quickly and then not at all, and then so quickly and not at all. But I don't think we're doing a good job with it yet, and we have to do better. What do you think, Christy?
Yeah, I agree that more communication is always better than less.
You know, I can't recall, Kevin, are there summary minutes from those meetings that have been conveyed out back to the committee, back to the bi-state working group and to others?
You know, we've been using the video archives. We've been videotaping the meetings for, I don't know, maybe a little less than a year. With Patty's help in the front office, she has started to transcribe, I believe, the last two meetings into a written minute type of format. So we're starting to do that for sure.
That might be a way to have it doesn't have to be detailed minutes, but just the summary points so that can be in the packet and the commissioner can see the sort of takeaways from the meeting.
You know, if we move forward and this project gets moved forward, I imagine it's going to be more and more vital to have better communications. Do we want to look at having a work session every 3 months for an hour, maybe not 3.5, 4 hours, but maybe just an hour just to update and have this opportunity to chat and see each other? And maybe we'll be back in the boardroom one of these days, but maybe every 3 months. And also in regard to the elevator speech, I'd kind of like to have the word transparency put in there.
Okay.
It's just a suggestion. I'm just one commissioner.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And touches on another thing I wanted to make sure we discussed. You know, the gold standard of managing public information in a project like this is, of course, ensuring transparency while also mitigating confusion and misinformation. So it's a really fine line that we walk as staff with the two-way flow of information, make sure that good information goes out, good information comes in. And so we do end up fulfilling sort of a filtering role, really most of the time just for time management, again, so you're not in a 5-hour meeting. And the weight limit situation resulted in more written public comment than we've had in months. And we just included that in the packet. Is that sufficient to just forward those emails to you? Or would you rather have some sort of evaluation, some sort of a summary written? I haven't included any cover memo on any written public comment because I really thought it should just be direct. You know, I don't know if you guys want us to do a little bit more of a examination when we receive information coming in and how much filtering you want us to do, I guess is the question.
You know, Genevieve, for me personally, if it's not overwhelming topic and we don't have 300 or 400 emails coming in, I like the way you just handled it. I want to read it myself. So I know my constituents, I know them first name basis and go, instead of your interpretation, it may not be the same as mine.
Right.
I can get my own interpretation. I'm going to read what I'd rather have, unless now if it gets overwhelming, it's about a bridge project and there's a problem and there's 300-400 emails, that may be a little different story. But until then, I prefer to have them actually sent to me in a packet. So I can read it.
Yeah, and we had such a great response to both of the public surveys that we've done. The first one with WSP for the bridge replacement project itself for the SDEIS, and then the one we completed in March for our strategic business plan. And as you know, there was a set of questions about the bridge and about future ownership of the bridge, concerns that people may have about the replacement project. And what I worry about is losing that the last time we really asked everybody, what do you feel about who should own the bridge going forward? It was pretty strong opinion, away from it being a P3 or the port and towards it being the dots. And so when we talk about project delivery, you know, how much do you want to be reminded of that? You know, or is there something that should be like maybe a footnote of, you know, the survey results said X, or, you know, do you receive the survey results once and maybe we just refer to it when we think it's critical?
I like the footnote idea. That sounded good.
Okay.
Especially in relation to something like that, where we realize there's strong public support for having the dots take a.
And, you know, the other one was airport noise. Do you want to look, you know, this is a bridge replacement thing, but maybe whenever we're talking about airport noise, I'll say as a reminder, in the survey, X number of households said this was an issue or something like that.
Carrying institutional knowledge forward. I like that.
Okay.
I'd like to second what Commissioner Strike said. I like getting the letters and being able to read them correctly. So, yeah,
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else on your wish list that would help you talk to your constituents about this project? Handouts or business cards, or let me know. If you think it's something you want, let me know and we'll get it to you.
Yeah, you know, Genevieve, due to the fact we're in a pandemic, so traditionally the things we do in the past prior to 2020 probably don't apply yet.
Yeah.
And we probably should just kind of wait and watch and not try to move that ball too fast down the court.
Right. Christy, I heard you start speaking.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of along the lines of what Hobie just mentioned, is that, you know, we're still in such an infancy in this project that I think that there's going to be a lot of communication that's going to need to happen. And so I think holding steady right now and doing things the way that we're doing it now until we start really going forward, I think would be better.
Okay. I think somebody's talking to Michael through his window, sorry.
Yeah. Well, do you have other things you'd like to cover, Genevieve, or is that the?
That was it. I just wanted to hear from you guys and touch base on, you know, what can we do better?
Okay. Well, you know, maybe we could go back to that slide of the questions.
Okay.
We skipped over before and see if that can generate any discussion.
Yeah, we'll need Michael for the answers on some of these here. Can you guys see the correct screen here? So Michael, John wanted to go through those key issues.
Sorry, was it to me? I was on a quick call. Is that to me?
So we wrapped up the communications discussion, and John wanted to just touch base and see if we needed further discussion on these issues.
Yeah, which is really a commission question. Does anybody want to delve any deeper into any of those questions?
I would say the one that's not on here is there was a suggestion that we go after big money now. And if there's a need for any discussion about that, I can only say that based on everything we are getting from our public advocates and based on responses from public officials, elected officials that Kevin's been in touch with, and based on our understanding, in a COVID year especially, but certainly without a major transportation package being propped up, although there is some talk in Washington that there's no chance of getting 75 or 80 or $100 million from a state. What that is a possibility of is maybe getting small amounts now, 5 million, which circles back into that, get further along the road to project readiness. So nothing that I'm hearing says that we should be or have any chance at all of trying to get a really significant amount of commitment from the state.
Michael, I have a question that with the strength that we have in the state of Washington with the legislators there now, and knowing that not only do our constituents, but all of us believe that this should be a DOT project, can we put pressure on either Washington or Oregon Department of Transportation and kick the can down the road a little?
Do I understand that suggestion would be to put pressure on a DOT at this point?
I'm just wondering, I'm just wondering when it would be more appropriate, like how far along in this process would it be appropriate for us to have legislation put pressure on Washington Department of Transportation and Oregon Department of Transportation for them to take over this project? Is that after the bridge is completely built and functioning? Is it not? Like, I just would like to know. I've had that question asked a lot. Like, when do we start? I know the docs don't want it, but if someone told them they had to take it, when would be the appropriate time for that?
Yeah, it's a really important question. We posed that question directly to the regional managers at ODOT and WashDOT, gosh, about a year ago, in the Region 1 office. And both of those, which are sort of a mid-level executive, both of them said, absolutely not. Now, you're right in that they're not the decision makers, but with all the factors being considered, it appears as though the best timing to make that request from the political branch would be when there's more progress, when a DOT can look at this and say, okay, we see the path forward. We see the progress being made. So they're able to pick it up with a high degree of certainty that they know the path to get the work done. But that time is not now. Partly it's situational, for just as a practical matter. The Region 1 is dealing with the Rose Quarter project, the Abernathy Bridge tolling projects, the I-5 project, and they are highly reluctant to, literally cannot take on another project. So the approach here is to work on the Bi-State Bridge Authority and see how that develops. But the point at which, if that doesn't work, or it seems less likely, that we're much further along, and at that point we simply have to make that ask whether a DOT can take it on at that point. And the ask is to the elected officials, to the legislature.
Have you had conversations with our lobbyists with regard to that, what the timing is they think would be appropriate and who to talk to, and maybe lay some of the groundwork for that discussion to occur down the road?
We have, and it's consistent with what I just said. We're building more and better relationships with specific elected officials that are on the state legislature transportation committees and other places, and they're getting a better understanding of the need, of the momentum that's underway, and it puts us in a position to make that request, but only after we can demonstrate more progress.
However, those specific legislators have all been willing to take our message, give us desk time, give us face time to our lobbyists, and hear our story, right?
I think the most likely spot where the legislature might push ODOT's hand or the DOT's hand is when it becomes a real significant financial contribution. You know, $5 million, $1 million, probably not enough. But if we start getting into the $35, $50 million, I could see the legislature saying, time out, this might be the right time.
Good point.
And bear in mind, there may be an unprecedented public works bill down the road, given these times, particularly on the federal level, that we aren't anticipating at this point. There could be significant money through federal highways made available over the next year or so in response to COVID. So
We just gotta get ready.
Opportunity, yeah. So
Absolutely right. Okay, so I guess we don't need to go through those specific questions. That's really the end of what staff had. If there's discussion on any, you want to circle back on anything, we're ready. But there's no more slides. Sorry.
Well, Michael, I feel like we accomplished what I thought was one of the primary goals of the work session, which is to get a consistent perspective on where we are amongst the 5 commissioners, trying to close the bridge or close the gap between getting the bi-state work group information in front of Port Commission. So thanks, this was good.
Chair Everett, beans we're all here. Can I speak for a moment?
Sure.
I just want to, this is kind of a side note. This is about the airport, and beans we're all here. I want you to think about this. We all know that Ann is leaving, and I think it would be, and I sit on the Airport Advisory Board, and I'm also, her and I are going to go over the FBO proposal we received. But with Ann being in a situation of leaving by, I believe, March 31st, I would like to propose that we have a work session with Ann for maybe an hour to bring everybody up to where the grants are at, where we're at with the build out, money obligation, a little more insight to us looking at possibility of running the FBO ourselves, have some numbers for us. But I'd like to propose that we have a work session between now and the middle of March to really get familiar with the airport. I think there's a lot to be learned that we assumed Ann was handling it, but she's going to be gone. And John and I sit on the Airport Advisory Committee, but that's not our job to oversee everything. But I think it'd be helpful for me if we have a work session to really understand what's up there, what's ahead of us financially and construction wise, to get a better understanding. Just as a suggestion, but it'd be helpful for me personally.
Right now you have meetings scheduled for March 2nd and March 16th. So if you want to think about adding a meeting, we might want to maybe add one like we do for spring planning. We'll do the work session and then a regular session immediately following.
But let me just point out that plan for March 16th, the regular meeting is a specific discussion item on the airport development plan, which is basically addressing many of the things, Commissioner Strike, that you mentioned. I hadn't anticipated that being an hour, but we could either expand that discussion item, anticipate a longer time, or as Genevieve suggested, we could have it start an hour early and work the airport first.
Michael, I was even thinking maybe John Mann could participate in that too, and just give us an overview of all the overhead that goes up there, the man hours that go up there, to get a better understanding of just, it's kind of the stepchild up there. It's out of sight, out of mind. And she's leaving, and I don't feel comfortable with all the controversy that we have right now with our constituents, that I don't want her to leave and have all the information that we could have got from her to do a better job as stewards of the airport.
So my suggestion for your consideration would be to start that meeting an hour early and focus on a work session in the morning for the first hour work session, and then we hit the 5 o'clock typical meeting.
I actually like that better than scheduling an additional meeting. Commissioner Shepherd, you want to weigh in? Commissioner Merriweather? Chapman?
I'm good with that. I'm good with that.
That's good, Hobie?
Hey, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Like I said, it just bring us up on the same page so we can move forward and make good, sound decisions for our constituents in our airport and our asset. Thank you.
Well, I don't have anything.
Well, it's 15 minutes before the scheduled end time. I'm loath to suggest we're at the end, but
I think we're required to sit here.
Heaven forbid.
right.
Well, absent any other contributions, I'd say we're adjourned.
That's good. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Great job.
Thank you.